The hot desert sun glared down as Officer Reynolds yanked open the trucker's door, barking orders. "Out of the truck, old man!" he snapped, pistol raised. The grizzled veteran stepped out slow, hands up, but his icy stare sent a chill through the rookie's spine. Reynolds had no idea what he'd just started. Love unwinding on YouTube with gripping stories? Hit subscribe now for more action-packed tales of tough truckers, unexpected twists, and real justice. Don't miss out. Join the ride today. The sun hung high over the Nevada desert, baking the cracked asphalt of a lonely highway. The air shimmered in the heat, and the only sound was the occasional gust of wind whipping through the endless stretches of dry brush. A solitary 18-wheeler rolled down the road, its chrome grille gleaming under the relentless sun. Behind the wheel sat Frank Holloway, a retired trucker who had seen more in his years on the road than most men could stomach. He had crossed state lines carrying everything from cattle to classified government equipment, and through it all, he had learned one thing: never let your guard down. He was a man carved from experience, with steel-gray hair, a lined face that had weathered every storm, and piercing blue eyes that scanned the horizon like a hawk. Frank wasn't just a trucker. Once upon a time, he had worn the uniform of a Green Beret, serving in conflicts the government never admitted to. Those days were long behind him, but the instincts remained. He never left home without a .45 Colt 1911 strapped to his hip and a Winchester rifle tucked behind his seat. As he neared a rundown gas station, the needle on his fuel gauge dipped toward empty. He sighed, flipping on his blinker as he pulled off the highway. The station had seen better days: dust-covered windows, rusting pumps, and a single attendant smoking a cigarette in the shade. Frank stepped out of his truck, adjusting the brim of his worn-out cap. The gas station was mostly empty, except for a police cruiser parked near the entrance. Frank barely gave it a second thought as he swiped his card at the pump. But then he heard it, the unmistakable click of a safety being disengaged. He turned slowly, eyes narrowing as he came face to face with a young cop, barely out of his academy blues, standing rigid with his service pistol trained directly at Frank's chest. "Hands where I can see 'em, old man," the cop barked. His voice was steady, but there was something in his posture, too stiff, too unsure. A rookie. Frank didn't move, sizing up the situation in seconds. The kid's badge read, Officer Daniels. He had that over-eager look Frank had seen before, the kind that got men killed. "You want to tell me what this is about?" Frank asked, his voice low and calm. The rookie swallowed hard, sweat beading at his temples. "We got a report about a suspicious truck fitting your description, possibly involved in criminal activity. Step away from the vehicle." Frank exhaled through his nose, suppressing a smirk. Somebody had called in a fake report on him. Probably some punk at the last rest stop who didn't like the way Frank had stared him down. "Son," Frank said, voice like gravel, "you're making a mistake." Daniels squared his jaw. "Just comply, sir." Frank had seen men freeze up in war. He had also seen them do stupid things when they thought they had the upper hand. Daniels wasn't in control of the situation, and Frank was about to show him why. Frank Holloway had been in worse situations. He had faced down insurgents in foreign lands, stared into the cold eyes of men who wouldn't hesitate to pull the trigger. But this? A rookie cop with an itchy finger? This was almost laughable. Almost. The gas station attendant had stepped back, watching the scene unfold from behind the safety of his counter. The desert wind howled around them, carrying a thick tension. Frank knew one wrong move could end badly, for both of them. "Son," Frank said, keeping his voice level, "I don't know who fed you that report, but I can tell you right now, it's dead wrong." Officer Daniels's grip tightened on his pistol. His breathing was heavier now. He was nervous. That was worse than him being confident. "Step away from the vehicle," Daniels ordered again. "Now." Frank didn't move. He wasn't about to let some green kid slap cuffs on him for nothing. He raised his hands slightly, just enough to keep the situation from escalating. "You ever been in a real fight, kid?" Frank asked. "Or you just playing cowboy with that badge?" The insult landed. Daniel's jaw clenched. His finger twitched dangerously close to the trigger. Too close. Frank sighed. "All right. Let me ask you this. If I was some kind of criminal, do you really think I'd just be standing here filling up my rig?" Daniels hesitated. A crack in the armor. That's when the real problem showed up. A black SUV screeched into the gas station, kicking up a storm of dust. The tires skidded as the vehicle came to a halt just a few feet away. The doors flew open. Two men stepped out. They weren't dressed like cops. They weren't dressed like civilians either. Tactical vests, scarred faces, guns, the kind of men Frank had dealt with before, and they weren't here for coffee. Daniels instinctively turned, confused. What the hell? Frank saw it all before the rookie even knew what was happening. This wasn't about some fake police report. This was a setup. One of the men pointed directly at Frank. "That's him." Daniels barely had time to react before the strangers drew their weapons. Frank didn't hesitate. He lunged. His left hand knocked Daniels' pistol downward, forcing the rookie to fire a shot into the dirt. His right grabbed the kid's collar and pulled him down just as the first bullet whizzed past where Daniels' head had been. The rookie hit the pavement hard, stunned but alive. Frank was already moving. Years of training, years of instinct, it all kicked in. He dove for cover behind a fuel pump as the air exploded with gunfire. Daniels scrambled, disoriented. "Who the hell are these guys?" Frank reloaded his Colt with calm precision. "Kid," he muttered, peeking out at the attackers. "You just stepped into the wrong damn fight." The air crackled with gunfire, bullets kicking up dust and shattering the silence of the desert highway. Frank Holloway, once a hardened military operative, now just an old trucker, was back in a fight he hadn't planned for. The rookie cop, Daniels, was frozen in shock. He had never been in a real gunfight, and now he was sitting in the middle of one, his hand trembling on his pistol. Frank had two options: run or fight. Running wasn't in his blood. He scanned the gas station. Low cover, poor escape routes, too many open angles. His truck was 10 feet away, but the two men weren't letting him near it. "Kid," Frank growled, keeping his voice low. "You want to live? Listen to me. Stay low, keep your head down, and don't fire unless you're damn sure you'll hit something." Daniels gulped, nodding stiffly. Frank waited, counted the shots. The attackers weren't trained. They were firing blindly, more interested in intimidation than precision. Amateurs. Then Frank saw his moment. The taller of the two gunmen stepped forward, reloading, his partner providing cover fire. Frank moved like a ghost. He rolled out from behind the fuel pump, aimed, and fired once. The taller gunman dropped like a sack of bricks. The second one cursed, scrambling back toward the SUV. But now, Daniels had found his nerve. He fired, wildly, missing, but it was enough. The second gunman ducked behind the vehicle, pinned down. Frank saw his chance. 1, 2, 3 strides, and he was at the truck. He yanked open the door, reaching into the glove compartment. Daniels shouted, "What are you doing?" Frank ignored him, his fingers closing around cold steel. When he turned back, he was holding a sawed-off shotgun. The last gunman peeked out, thinking the fight was over. Frank fired. The blast tore through the SUV's windshield, sending the man diving for cover. Silence. Dust settled. The attackers were down, one unconscious, one wounded, the last one gone. Daniels looked at Frank with wide eyes. "Jesus, who the hell are you?" Frank exhaled, lowering the shotgun. "Just a trucker, kid." But Daniels knew that was a lie. Daniels' breath came in sharp, panicked gasps. His hands were still shaking from the firefight, his knuckles white around his pistol grip. He had gone from pulling over an old trucker for a busted taillight to surviving a full-blown gunfight. Nothing in his academy training had prepared him for this. Frank, on the other hand, looked completely unfazed. The old trucker stood there, dusty, calm, and deadly. He ejected the spent shells from his sawed-off shotgun, his movements precise, practiced. The kind of muscle memory that only came from years of real combat. Daniels swallowed hard. Who the hell are you? Frank glanced at him, but before he could answer, a low groan cut through the silence. The wounded gunman was still alive. Frank walked over, towering over the man as he coughed, clutching his bleeding shoulder. The man's mask had fallen, revealing a tattooed face, hard and weathered, eyes filled with hatred. Daniels stepped forward, gun raised. "We should cuff him. Call for backup." Frank didn't move. His gaze was locked on the gunman. "Your cartel," Frank muttered, more of a statement than a question. The man grinned through his pain. "You're dead, old man. You don't know who you just pissed off." Daniels stiffened, but Frank just let out a dry chuckle. "Oh, I know exactly who I pissed off." Daniels frowned. "What's he talking about?" Frank finally looked at him, his blue eyes cold as steel. "This wasn't random, kid. They weren't just some highway thugs. They knew exactly who I was." Daniels shook his head. "But that doesn't make sense. You're just—" And then it hit him. The way Frank had moved, his calm under pressure, his immediate tactical decisions, the precision of his shots. Daniels' stomach dropped. "You were military," Daniels whispered. "Not just military. Special forces?" Frank didn't confirm it, but he didn't deny it either. The wounded gunman laughed weakly. "You don't get it, do you, cop?" He winced, spitting blood onto the pavement. "You think this old bastard is just some trucker?" Daniels felt cold dread creeping into his bones. Frank bent down, grabbing the man's collar, his voice low and dangerous. "You tell your boss the same thing I told him 10 years ago." Frank growled. "I don't work for anyone anymore." Daniel's heart skipped a beat. 10 years ago? "You were involved with the cartel?" Daniels asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Frank let go of the man, standing up. "Not by choice." The gunman coughed, shaking his head. "You really think they'll let you go, old man? You think you can just keep driving across this country, hauling cargo like you're some nobody?" Frank gave him a long, hard look. "I've been doing it for a decade, haven't I?" Daniels was trying to piece it together. If Frank had been ex-military, and he had crossed paths with the cartel before, what exactly had he done? Before Daniels could ask, the sound of approaching engines echoed in the distance. Frank's eyes flicked to the horizon. "We need to go," he said flatly. Daniels hesitated. "Go? We need to arrest him and—" Frank was already walking back to his truck. Daniels looked down at the wounded gunman, who was smiling despite his injury. "You should listen to him, cop," the man sneered. "You just stepped into a war that's way bigger than you." Daniels felt his stomach twist. Frank climbed into his rig, starting the engine. "Last chance, kid. You coming or not?" Daniels looked back toward the highway. More vehicles were coming. He had a choice: stay and fight a war he didn't understand, or get in that truck and learn the truth. He made his choice. He climbed into the passenger seat, slamming the door shut. Frank gunned the engine. The storm was just beginning. The roar of the semi's engine filled Daniel's ears as they sped away from the scene, dust kicking up behind them. The tension in the cab was thick, the weight of everything that had just happened pressing down on him like an avalanche. Frank's hands gripped the wheel with calm precision. He wasn't panicked. He wasn't second-guessing. He was just moving forward, like a man who had done this before. Daniels finally broke the silence. "Are you going to tell me what the hell just happened back there?" Frank exhaled through his nose, staring ahead at the open road. "You already figured most of it out," Daniels shook his head. Number I haven't. One second I'm pulling over a trucker, the next I'm in a shootout with cartel hitmen who, apparently, knew exactly who you were. That's not normal. Frank was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke. Years ago, before I got into trucking, I did a job for some people I shouldn't have. I was out, retired. But old debts have a way of resurfacing. He glanced at Daniels. And some enemies don't forget. Daniels frowned. So you were in special forces. Then what? You worked for the cartel? Frank stiffened. Not by choice. Daniels let the words settle. So what was today about? He finally asked. Frank sighed. They wanted to remind me that they still know where I am, that I don't get to just disappear. Daniels swallowed hard. And you? What do you want? Frank smirked. I just want to haul freight and be left alone. Daniels scoffed. Yeah, well, I don't think they're gonna let that happen. Frank's face darkened. No, he admitted. They're not. They rode in silence for a few minutes before Daniels shook his head, running a hand through his hair. Jesus, I was just supposed to be writing traffic tickets today. Frank chuckled. Hell of a first day on the job, huh? Daniels exhaled sharply, shaking his head. Yeah, no kidding. He hesitated. So what now? Frank didn't answer right away. His eyes were locked on the road, but his mind was elsewhere. They're coming, he said finally. They don't take failure lightly. If they sent a crew after me today, there'll be more. Daniels felt a chill run through him. You sound like you've been through this before. Frank shot him a knowing look. Because I have. Daniels swallowed. He had two choices. He could walk away from this right now, pretend like none of it ever happened, and let Frank handle it himself. Or he could stand by the old trucker. And Daniels wasn't the kind of man to run from a fight. So what's the plan? He asked. Frank's smirk returned. Now you're thinking like a soldier. Daniels let out a breath. Yeah, well, right now I'm just trying not to get killed. Frank nodded. Good instinct. The road stretched ahead, endless and uncertain. But one thing was clear. Frank wasn't just going to roll over and wait for the cartel to come for him. And now? Daniels wasn't either. This fight wasn't over. It was just beginning.